Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have guest Sadie Jones, ex-BigLaw recruiter, here to talk with us about how to handle a variety of difficult situations that could arise at work. Your Law School Toolbox host is Alison Monahan, and normally I'm here with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today, we're excited to have guest Sadie Jones, an ex-BigLaw recruiter, here to talk with us about how to handle a variety of difficult situations that could arise at work. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
Our pleasure. So let's dive right in. First, let's talk about some issues you might commonly see with people who are just starting out in their careers, whether it's summer associates or in some other type of summer job, maybe which could lead to a more permanent position. So in a lot of cases, people got these jobs early. So let's say you got this job during your second year and it was based mostly on your first year grades. But before you start working that summer, your grades go down a lot. Do you tell them? And then also, what about 3L grades, assuming you have an offer to return?
Well, I would say it depends how much they went down.
A lot.
Yeah.
You're not failing out, but a lot.
Yeah, I think if there's a significant drop and it's not in, one class, but it's an overall trend, and let's say, that you had been getting A's and you're, even getting B's or B minuses, I think it's always better to bring it up yourself with them and address it. I'm guessing there's probably a reason if it's an overall trend. Maybe you had an illness, maybe there was a family situation. So
maybe
I think
you just stopped studying after you got the job.
That's possible too. And I think even in that case, I think there's probably a story, and I think you can talk to them about your plans for improvement. Maybe you're going to hire somebody to help you. Maybe, you have a plan to get yourself back on track. If it was a personal issue or an illness, that, may be solved. But I think if they went down enough that you feel like somebody's going to notice, it's better to bring it up with them yourself.
And is this something that jobs are typically going to ask for? Like, are they going to ask you to submit an updated transcript before you start as a summer or after? Like, when do they ask for this sort of stuff?
So when I was a recruiter, I would probably remind people of it before they even finish the year, before they started with us, that we'll need that. Mm-hmm. And then I would remind them again when they started. A lot of people don't have final transcripts yet. So I would say we don't need it until you have a final one. Something you should not do is try to hide it. Mm-hmm. Which I have seen people do. You think like, oh, they won't notice. I can tell you as a recruiter, I would never not have a final transcript. So I would follow up with you as many times as it takes. And people make up excuses, and, sometimes it's towards the end of the summer and they say they don't have it, and you probably do have it, and we probably figured out a way to get it. So, don't bury this stuff. It's never going to turn out well.
And is this something that people would factor in at the firms in terms of making final offers? Were your 2L grades?
I think they're a factor. I don't think they're an enormous factor if your grades were good before and if there were a reason for it. If there is some kind of really downward trend, or you failed something, or you didn't complete, something. Mm-hmm. And as a 3L, I think if there's a huge drop, it could be something that they would go back and look at. I personally haven't seen an offer taken away for that reason. Mm-hmm. But I still don't think, even if you're worried that that's a possibility, that it would be any reason to try to somehow, hide your grades from them.
So you're in favor basically of going to someone, like who would this person be, put that aside for a second, and saying, hey, you're going to get a transcript that shows that I did really poorly in these couple of classes. This is why that happened. Here's what I'm doing about it. And, let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's always going to make you look better. I don't think there's that many law students that really do take that initiative. And usually it's a conversation where we've seen the grades and then we're going to address it with them.
Right.
If it's something that's that significant, what happened here, I would say talk to who you're comfortable with. As the recruiter, I definitely talk to a lot of law students as, their first point of contact. Mm-hmm. And either they were, telling me as a firm person, or they were asking me, who should I talk to? And I would say, it can depend, again, on who you're comfortable with, but the hiring partner, maybe your mentor, maybe your point of contact when you were interviewing, if you've already spent the summer there, it could be the head of the summer associate committee. I think talk to someone you feel like you can, have a frank conversation with, but also is someone at the firm who, probably is in a position of power, I think is a good idea.
Right. I think, too, if you can think of among those people who might, for whatever reason, be your biggest ally. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If it's a partner that you worked with that really liked you, maybe you let them run interference with someone. You don't have to go straight to the hiring committee yourself.
Absolutely. And I think, most of the time, this stuff is probably not going to be as big of a deal on their end as you built it up to in your head.
Okay, you got a C. You're probably not getting your offer pulled because you got one C.
Right. But, if you somehow won't give them your transcript and won't let them see that C, that's going to look suspicious.
Well, and I've even heard about people trying to actually alter their transcripts, which, let us just say, is crazy and not something you should do.
Yeah. Well, it just always comes out in the end. There's always going to be something, you think they're not going to notice. But yeah, it's totally crazy.
That's something that would
get an ethical violation.
Yeah, that would get you fired.
Get kicked out of school. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you got a poor grade, that grade is probably not going to get your offer revoked. If they find out that you tried to alter your transcript and lie about it, I think almost anyone would fire you at that point, even if you were already working there.
Yes. I absolutely. And I think the key with it really is to say, how are you going to address this issue? It's less about the fact that you got that C. It's saying, this is why I think it happened. This is why I'm going to work on this. 3L year is not a time to just completely, forget about all your responsibilities, even if you have a job offer.
Right. You want to make sure at a minimum you're fulfilling all the graduation requirements. You're doing a paper if that's required. What you don't want to do is have to go back to your employer and say, well, actually, it turns out I'm not really going to graduate in May. I'm going to have to wait till December because I didn't bother taking this class that was required.
That would be good. Pretty awful.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. All right. So similarly, say that you have recently started your post-graduation job. You have successfully graduated. You have not altered your transcript. And you take the bar exam and, everything seems to be going well. You've started working and then you find out you failed the bar. What do you do?
So similar advice to what I said before. I think you should proactively tell somebody. Somebody is probably checking, and I know that it used to be more public, at least in California, with a list, and that's not necessarily available now. But somebody is going to follow up and make sure that people got their results and what they were. So I think you have to keep in mind you are not the first person that this happened to. I know in all my years of doing this, I don't think that I went through one round where we didn't have at least one person fail.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Which is not everyone, but that's just, I think
it happened
to me. Yeah. And, sometimes it was people who were just starting. Sometimes it was someone who had transferred offices or was a lateral and had to take a different bar. So lots of people are taking the bar. But I think you have to keep in mind that it happens to people, they are not fired from their job. At least we never let anybody go for that reason. They always got at least one more try.
Right, so they weren't fired on the first try.
No, I don't think so. I can't imagine anyone being fired on the first try. And like I said, even the second try, we would let people have another chance, which
I think that's getting a little... Yeah. My impression, at least, is in a lot of jobs, I think most employers, maybe not all, but most employers probably will not let someone go if they fail the bar once. If you fail the bar twice, I think the majority of them would say, you know what, you've been here a full year, you can't really work as a lawyer. This is not going to work.
I agree. I think that some of the people kind of lucked out. It didn't happen very much. So I think it depended on sort of what their role was and their relationship with people.
Well, and if you're admitted somewhere else and you're taking it as a lateral, it matters a lot less.
Exactly. And if you've already been at the firm a few years, and most of the issues actually are with people who have, taken it after being out of school for a while. But definitely on the first try, they're going to work with you. They're going to try to make it work. They're going to make sure that you figure out a way to have some time off and what your plan is. And I think people are sympathetic. And so the issues come around when it's been like a week or it's been 2 weeks and we haven't heard from you and we don't know if you passed and, we're confused. I think that is not a good situation for anybody.
No, I think we have a post on one of the sites about how to tell your boss that you failed, which we can link to, from someone who actually did have this experience and had to go and tell his boss that he'd failed. I think in most states, you get a little bit of advance warning before the public knows what's going on. So, you're typically going to have a couple of days where you can accept this reality and then figure out what to do before your boss necessarily finds out publicly. But I agree with you. I think if this is a situation you're in, you've got to get out ahead of it. This is crisis management 101. You've got to get out ahead of the story. You've got to send an email or whatever it is or call to whoever needs to hear this information from you first before they find out some other way. Because it just makes you look, you just failed the bar. You're already not like in anyone's like high graces at this point. But to put your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening is not going to improve the situation.
Yeah, and I think sort of similarly to the grades, maybe you haven't figured everything out in 2 days, but I think it'd be great to go to them and say, like, I'm going to have a plan, for how I'm going to pass this next time.
Right.
And
I've reached out to some tutors or I've done this or that. I've reached out to my school. I'm looking at these resources. Within the next week, I should be able to say exactly what I'm going to do. I would probably propose having a certain amount of time off of work or taking a part-time schedule. I'm serious about doing this because the reality is you need to pass the next time.
And along those lines, too, we would always either encourage / insist that they take time off. It's usually going to be unpaid time if it's a second, go around.
Right.
But it would really be an issue if someone said they didn't want to do that. And I did have people where I really had to say to them, look, this isn't really optional because because your priority is passing the bar this next time. So you need to just be focused on that. That's what the firm wants from you. They don't want you, whatever work you're going to do in that time isn't really going to be the point. So you do what they want. Like if they have a system for it, you go along with it.
Right, and I think if their system doesn't work for you, if they're like, okay, you can have a week off before the bar, but otherwise you're working 80-hour weeks, I think you need to push back and be like, you know what, I don't think that's going to position me to do what I need to do.
Absolutely, and you should tell them you want the priority to be passing the bar.
Right, which I think everyone should, at least in theory, agree with. But, I took the second bar exam when I was working, and it was like, oh, okay, you're going to get, 3 weeks off, and then that got a little bit compressed, and then suddenly you're like, okay, no. I'm taking this time off or I'm not going to pass this test.
Yeah. And I think really taking the time off is probably key rather than even going down to part-time if you can, is just like really focusing.
Yeah. I think it's very hard, particularly if you've already failed. There's a ton of pressure. You need that time. I'm not saying you have to take 8 weeks off or anything like that. You've already studied once. And I do think you probably need to look into getting someone to help you. I'm not just saying that because we offer tutoring, but look, like you failed once. If you do the same thing again, you're going to fail again. So just don't do that. Like don't put yourself in that position. Like you need to pass at this point.
But I think you should go into it assuming, it's going to be a difficult conversation, but it's a more difficult conversation if they have to come to you and say, hi, did you pass the bar exam?
Oh, yeah, you didn't. Okay, so why didn't you tell anyone?
Yeah. I had someone once go 2 weeks where we were still trying to figure it out, and he wasn't in the office. It did not go well.
Yeah, so you got to get out ahead of this stuff. It's unpleasant, but it's going to be a lot more unpleasant if you try to pretend it's not happening.
Definitely.
All right, well, let's circle back to a slightly more positive topic, because I know this is something that people have a lot of angst around, and I think a lot of it is unnecessary. So what about judicial clerkships? I mean, do employers really care if you take a year for a clerkship after graduation later on? Like, do they have preferences about when you do it? Will they hold your job open? How does this work?
This is interesting because I do always find that law students seem really nervous about telling the employers that they have a clerkship. And I always found that the firm is going to think it's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Having a clerkship is an advantage to everyone. It's going to give you good experience. It's, the firm wants clerks. They go out and recruit clerks
give a bonus.
Yeah. It's a positive. So I think law students sometimes get nervous, especially if they've already accepted the offer and maybe it didn't come up that they were applying, or, I do think you should be open with them that you're applying from before so that they kind of have that on their radar. The biggest thing with clerkships is that, I don't know if it really matters that much to the firm whether you do it right after school or you work for a little and do it and, hopefully come back. But what matters to a firm is sort of planning for the future. Mm-hmm. So as much as they can, they really like to know, like, what's the pipeline, and even down to a single person makes a difference. So they know who to hire. So I think it's just about being open with them about when you're going to do it and when you find out. But I think, it's definitely a positive.
I think that's right. I think there's a lot of angst around how people are going to react, but the reaction is usually going to be, great, congratulations. Like, let's figure out how to make that work.
Absolutely. And I mean, they respect, there's NALP rules on keeping offers open for people who are even applying to clerkships. And I think firms are pretty generous if, you need extra time. A lot of judges, may not let you accept the offer. They may, but you have to talk to them about it. So it's always good to kind of know what the ethical rules are and make sure, if you have accepted the offer, that there's something in place in case that firm ever, comes up in front of your judge. You just really want to be on top of all of that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something people don't necessarily understand coming out of law school, is that there are really, all these conflict rules and things that you learn about in professional responsibility. Suddenly they actually matter. And there are lots of things you may not be able to work on or take part in, and you just need to be sure that you understand what those are. I mean, if you leave and go back to a firm, obviously they'll ask you, like, what did you work on, and run conflicts checks, but people need to be aware of what it was. You need to be careful about what you're putting down there so that you don't accidentally end up in some sort of professional violation.
And there's also sometimes rules, or I think a lot of times, about, accepting things from firms while you're working for the judge. Like, I know at a firm I worked at, if I were even taking someone to coffee, I couldn't pay for them.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean, some firms are stricter about that than others. But I would say, be on top of that. You don't want to do anything that's, it may seem small, but it can be a big deal for them.
Yeah, particularly if you're clerking for a judge in an area that your firm is big in. Say you're clerking in Boston and you have an offer with Robes and Gray. Like, Robes and Gray is probably going to show up in front of your judge. Like, how is this going to be handled?
Yeah, you just want to be transparent about everything, like we've said. I think it's also good if when you go and tell them, you tell them, who's the judge, where are they, what you think the time frame is. Like, give them as much information as so they're not having to come back to you and ask you lots of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes, if you're thinking about maybe doing another one after that, again, probably information you want to share.
Yeah. And I think, they'll probably keep in touch with you while you're doing it, and you should keep in touch with them. It's always good, even if you're not sure if you're going to accept the offer to come back, you always want to leave things, on a positive light. You don't want to just disappear,
Right, exactly. Keep your options open until you've decided what your next move is.
Yeah, because who knows? Life changes, and sometimes you don't think you were going to, and you want to. So
yeah, there's no reason to burn a bridge that you don't need to burn.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk now about some situations that might arise in the actual workplace and how you would suggest handling them. So, first off, what do people need to disclose, or should they think about disclosing? We've been talking a lot about, just be honest and open. regarding some sort of criminal issue, whether that's in the past or unfortunately in the present. You get in a bar fight or whatever, and maybe you have an assault charge, or these sort of issues around mental health, anxiety, substance abuse, that kind of thing, either past or present.
I think there's not an exact right and wrong for some of these issues. Usually you're going to fill out an employment, application or form at some point. Yeah, where you probably need to disclose if you were convicted. It might just say felony. It might say any criminal, action. I think that if you have, any kind of criminal history that might show up in a background check and there's somewhere where you were supposed to disclose it, you should.
Right. I think there you got it. I mean, my advice there is read what it asks you. If it asks you about felony convictions and you were convicted of a misdemeanor, probably don't disclose it. If it asks you about convictions, you better put it down.
The other thing is, there are places where they're running background checks, but they don't ask you for an employment application. I worked somewhere like that. So it may not be something where you're actively writing it down ahead of time, but I think you're going to need to be prepared that they're going to ask you about it. So there might not be an opportunity to say it before they see it. And I know that happened a few times. And we went back and talked to the person. And usually there really wasn't an issue after that. They explained what it was. I think you just need to be prepared to address it with them and know what you're going to say.
And the other thing, too, is, most of the stuff probably has already been disclosed on your law school application and or on your bar application. I think, the total disaster scenario is you've tried to hide something that comes out, say, when you're applying for the bar, and then you can't pass the character and fitness because you should have already disclosed this in your applications. And then that's when things, again, get really messy.
Yeah. And I think, hopefully you've talked to somebody about this, along the way, like you're saying, it's already come out.
Well, there are also attorneys, like with the bar, there are attorneys who, if you are having trouble with character and fitness, or you think that you're going to, there are actual attorneys who this is what they do that you probably should have a consultation with and say, look, here's the situation. I had a DUI when I was 20. how do I handle this?
Yeah, because the worst case scenario, like you said, is it's the end of the road and you can't get admitted.
No, and they're serious. That's not, you do not mess around with the state bar on the character and fitness because you will not be an attorney.
Well, and I know a lot of this stuff is made much worse by lying than what the actual situation is.
If they think that you've tried to cover it up, and that's when things get very, very ugly pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it's kind of what we've said all along.
Yeah, exactly. I think the key message is if you need to disclose something, you should disclose it.
Absolutely. Now, I think with mental health issues, I think it sort of depends on the situation. I think if it's something that's ongoing that may affect your work, or, is something that you're dealing with right now that you think has an impact on your life, they're not allowed to discriminate against you for it. And maybe you don't want to make it public. Maybe you want to talk to somebody about it. I've had those scenarios before, and we would definitely try to make accommodations for people. But I think it can be an issue if it's something that you're dealing with, that you're not talking to anybody about, but it's something that is affecting your work or, is affecting the firm in some way.
Because at that point, you're not really protected by the ADA. If you've decided not to disclose that you're having, panic attacks or whatever, and you get fired because you have one in court, you're going to have it seems to me you'd have a lot weaker case to say, well, this should have been a protected category if nobody knew it was happening. Right.
So I think you don't have to tell everybody. And I think it's sort of what we said before about picking who you're going to talk to about it.
Yeah, I think this is a tricky question. And I think, I think most lawyers at firms at least tend to err on the side of not disclosing anything to anyone. But then that runs its own problems because, you don't have protections you would otherwise have. And also nobody can work around whatever your issue is if they don't know about it. So whatever it is that's causing you excess stress, isn't going to be addressed because everyone's just well, whatever, this is just life. I think it's
they may think you're just screwing up.
Right, exactly. I think it's a really hard question. I think people tend to under disclose this when really they would probably be better off in a lot of cases if they were more upfront about it. But obviously it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to talk about.
Yeah. So I think you need to like ask yourself, you know, if you do have some of these issues, do you have a handle on it? How is this possibly going to affect things?
Well, and also if something's totally out of control, I think at some point you have to ask yourself, is this job really worth it? You know, like if I feel like I can't tell anyone that I am abusing drugs really severely and, I'm doing it to deal with my job situation, and I know that probably I would be fired if I told them, but I can't tell anyone, so I keep doing more. It's just like, this is probably not a situation that you really should remain in.
And especially going into it, if that's how you're starting, I think, things just get more stressful from there.
Yeah, I think sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, okay, for my own existence, I need to stop doing this job, or at least take a leave of absence or do something. And this, my health is more important than whatever this job is. I'll find another job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, every situation is different, but I know that a lot of the summers felt more comfortable talking to me as the recruiter about some of their personal stuff. Mm-hmm. And I would try to, steer them in the right direction in terms of talking to other people or whatnot. So pick someone you feel like you can confide in.
Right. And what if people have these sort of personal issues, health issues, or even, say somebody in their family is sick or passes away, or they have some sort of emergency situation, whether it's over the summer or in their full-time job, and they need to miss work. How do you handle this?
Well, it can be tricky if you're a summer associate because the summer is fairly short. So I know there's usually in most summer jobs either a day or two that they give you sort of as you can take off. Mm-hmm. So if it's just fitting in that, you just tell them you want to take off. If you think it's going to be more than that, I think it sort of depends how long. If you have a family member that's dying of cancer and you know that you need to be with them and it's going to be the rest of the summer, I think you have to really consider maybe taking yourself out of things and trying to do it again next summer, which is a situation I've had happen before, and we had the person come back. Mm-hmm. I think if it's something more short term or you're extremely sick this week, I think most likely they would accommodate you. You may be taking some of the days unpaid. Mm-hmm. Which I don't think should be a big deal to you. So I think you have to sort of weigh how much time it is and what the scenario is.
Right. Yeah, and just what works for you. I had an unfortunate situation where the very first week of my clerkship, my father suddenly passed away. At that point, I didn't even have, say, the judge's contact information or anything, and I wasn't even in town. It was just one of those, complete clusters of a situation where you're like, oh gosh, what is going on here? And so basically, obviously he worked around it and was like, all right, what do you need? Where do you need to be? How long do you need to be there? How much time do you want off? And come back when you want to. And I came back pretty quickly because I was like, what am I going to do? Sit around in my apartment in a city where I don't know anybody? Mm-hmm. Anyway, we had a conversation where he's like, look, if you find in the future you need more time or whatever, you just tell me, but unless you bring it up, I'm not going to bring it up with you. I'm just going to assume that you'll come to me if you need something, and I'm totally fine accommodating that. But I'm not going to keep bringing it up, which I actually appreciated.
Yeah, and I think, that sounds like a great response. And I think you have to remember everyone, they're a person. Yeah. They probably have feelings. And so even though they might be your boss and you're intimidated by them, when you have something like that happen, they're going to care.
Maybe. I don't know. I had another partner try to tell me I couldn't go visit my dying grandmother. So, you get both sides of it.
Well, unfortunate.
It was. I was literally I was like, you can fire me, but I'm getting on the flight.
Yeah. Well, and you have to look out for yourself. Like you said, what do you need? This, it is a job. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, that leads right into my next question. So, what if you're having difficulty with a tough boss on an assignment or with other people in the workplace, whether it's a secretary, legal assistant, that type of thing?
These things can be tricky. I think you have to kind of ask yourself, how bad is it? Is it just that it's a tough assignment. It's, the person's kind of harsh. Even they're hurting your feelings. I do think there's a point where it's, you're going to be a lawyer. You're probably going to need a tough skin on some things. But I think if there's something that is really bothering you and you feel like it's not fair and you feel like, you're not learning anything, and I think there's bigger issues, I always suggest that you maybe start with your associate mentor. Mm-hmm. I always think that's a good place to start because usually those people are picked because they're good in these kind of situations.
Right.
I know that, I would assign the mentors, and for that reason,
Like they have some emotional intelligence. They might actually be able to think about like, oh, well, what are your options here? Like what might work, what might not work? Oh, yeah, this guy's a real jerk. Just suck it up. He's like that to everyone.
Exactly. And I think, be honest with them. They probably know the person. They probably know, what the scenario is with them. And, you can talk to them about what happened that led to that. And like maybe they have a certain style. They might be able to give you advice about how to deal with them. But I would say, you talk to them. I think, there are situations where, something is sort of past just being, a harsh person and it's too much. And then maybe they get the head of the summer committee involved. I've had those scenarios also, and it's just, that person shouldn't be working with a summer associate or a new associate, not the right fit. So I think there are people there who can get involved and help you, but I also don't think that you should just go running to everybody every time something's difficult.
Yeah, I think you've got to really assess the situation. I mean, if we're talking about some sort of harassment, particularly in some sort of protected category, I think that's, a totally different scenario than just someone being really harsh about your work product or something like that. Sometimes, let's face it, lawyers are not the greatest people to work for, and you're just going to meet jerks. My strategy was basically like try to get off that project as quickly as possible and get on something that was more accommodating. But, these are the people you end up having to deal with. In the dying grandmother scenario on the way to the airport, we were actually all at trial. So I ran into the junior partner on the case who was like, what the hell's going on here? And I told him, and he was like, okay, this should not be happening. Like, I'm going to talk to this person.
Exactly. That seems like a situation where, you needed that and that was the right thing to do.
But honestly, at that point, I literally didn't care. I was just like, whatever, you can fire me. Like, it's more, like this is a breaking point.
Absolutely.
But then the reality is when I quit a few months later, that person was like, you're breaking my heart. Like, how could you do this? I'm like, you're nuts.
That is funny how that happens.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of people aren't self-aware.
Yeah, I just think sometimes too people don't understand they do have the ability to push back a little bit more than they think to. So if you're totally overloaded with work and somebody comes to you and demands that you do a new assignment, it's like you can't take that project on. You have to push back.
Well, and I think even as a summer associate, that's a good skill to learn. I understand you're sort of lowest on, the rung at that point. But I think that you can talk to people. You can stand up for yourself. That's okay.
You can try. It might not work. I got a cold offer as a result of doing that. But, it is what it is.
Probably depends on the firm and, the specific situation.
Yeah, but I think sometimes, stuff just happens and there's nothing you can do about it. And you're unfortunately the person in the crossfire. And it's just like, okay, you need to figure something out because this is probably not a great workplace.
Definitely. And we did learn sometimes, like I said before, that certain partners maybe weren't a good fit for summer associates.
Mm-hmm. For anyone, really?
Yeah, for assigning anything to anyone, it should just work by themselves. So, we try to keep that in mind. And there are certain times where, even you might be talking to another associate about assignment you're getting. They might tell you that person's, tough.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, if you're in a real harassment type situation, I think that can be obviously very, very difficult to figure out what to do. A lot of this is never reported that probably should be, you just got to start documenting everything. And, so if you do decide to go to the HR department or whoever it is, you have your dossier that's this is what's been happening, this is not appropriate, do something. Probably, I don't even know at this point if they would or not, but at least you give it your shot.
Absolutely. And my experience with HR is, like you said, a lot of people won't bring it up. But when something did come up, they really did address it and investigate it and look at it. And I was actually impressed with how they handled it. It's just that I think most people aren't comfortable even getting to that step.
Yeah, and I think before you do that, you probably want to talk to an employment lawyer.
Yes.
Who's not in your firm.
Yeah.
Like, figure out what your rights are here. Like, figure out what the law is before you go and say, like, hey, this is what's been happening. I mean, you know, I think ideally more people would report it, but you can understand why people don't.
Definitely.
All right, well, let's totally switch gears and talk about technology, because this is an area that's really easy for people to screw up on all different kinds of levels. So what do you do if you screw up and you don't correctly label a document or something like that so that other people can find it?
Well, I guess it depends how you found out you screwed it up.
Usually it's from a frantic phone call from someone's secretary being like, we can't find this document that we need right now. It's your fault.
Exactly. First of all, don't panic, because I think that's only going to make things worse. And I know that feeling where you know you did something wrong and you're not really sure what to do about it.
Right.
And then I say get into the mode where it's less about, you know, trying to make an excuse for what you did or why, you know, you did it or whatever. Try to figure out where it is, how you can get it to them.
Yeah, just fix it, basically.
I can fix it. That's all they care about. They're probably not even, you know, it's not going to be as big of a deal in the end. They're probably just frantic because they need it.
Right, exactly. Like, the focus should be on, okay, here's how we're going to fix this problem. And then later on, you can talk about how it happened or if you need more training or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it was funny because I did correctly label all my documents, and the senior associate, who was a total jerk, and the partner, who was kind of an idiot, both did not know how to use the system, and they were trying to get in touch with me at Burning Man, which, as you know, at that point had like literally no service, and I had made very clear to them that they would not have service. And so I get back to all these frantic messages like, we can't find your document. And after 3 days, they just finally figured out how to use the system. And I'm like, it's on the bottom of the document. Just look it up.
Oh my gosh.
So it might not even be your fault.
And that wasn't even, yeah. And that's the other thing. I think don't focus on whose fault it is. Definitely not in the moment, because it doesn't matter in that
just
moment.
like get it done.
Yeah.
But sometimes you might get blamed for things that you didn't even do.
Yeah. I mean, that actually happens a lot for sure. And I think, yeah, like you said, figure out, you know, afterwards, okay, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? How do I make sure I know how to label things and I have, you know, the right security on it or whatever?
Yeah, and there's the infamous one that always happens, that happened earlier this week with something, is if you are the one filing the documents, so like e-filing in court, double, triple check your attachments, because people are always uploading the wrong things, whether it's like recipes when it should be a deposition transcript, or in the case like a few days ago, somebody uploaded like a confidential work product to something that was supposed to be a scheduling order. You know, these are the things where you're just like, okay, you can't do that. Like, you have to double check this.
Yeah, and I would say double check everything. I know. Yeah, I always open attachments when I have them. You also, if you're forwarding something, make sure you've looked at the bottom of the chain and know everything on it. Mm-hmm. Little things like that can become a really big deal. Another thing I think gets people in trouble is like the auto-populating of people's email addresses.
Oh yeah, you should just really turn that off.
Yeah, it's just can be a disaster.
We had a partner like accidentally CC the judge on an email saying what an idiot she was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I got the phone call from the partner before he had done anything about it, being like, did this just really happen? And I'm like, oh yeah, it looks like that really happened. Guess you're going to have to go and grovel.
And for whatever people try to do this, there is no way to get something back. All that does is spam up everyone's stuff.
It just alerts everyone that you said something that you want back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most programs, I know, like, a lot of programs have a delay so that you can hit send, and then it has, you can set like a 5-second delay, because oftentimes you see it as it's going out and you're like, oh my gosh, that should not be going to this person.
Yeah.
That's a different, like there you can hit stop and it won't actually send. But you should be familiar with the tools that are available to you to figure out how to stop yourself from being an idiot, basically.
Yeah, I know at the firm a lot of times stuff would go around to the whole office that wasn't supposed to, and then they would hit the button that tries to recall it. And that is, first of all, you're going to open it because you want to see what it was. And second of all, it just does something to mess up everyone's computer.
Yeah, so just understand the technology you're working with. Another one that's really common is know how to redact things electronically. So, if you're using a PDF, just putting black over it doesn't actually redact it. If you're using Word documents, you make sure you understand metadata and that you've stripped out the metadata so it doesn't have like the timestamps of you going back and forth on your expert report that you're not supposed to be like making edits to officially, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like you just need to understand what you're getting into so that you're not the one who like does a stupid thing that basically tanks your entire case.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, on the flip side of that, what if you sort of accidentally or semi-accidentally see something that you should not have seen on the company's server?
So this is something that I know recently happened to someone I knew, and they didn't really understand that if you open something, someone actually can know that you opened it.
Yeah, like everything is being tracked.
Yeah. So if that happens, I think it depends on the situation. But I think if you really saw something confidential or something, there could be a variety of different things that you really shouldn't have seen. Mm-hmm. I actually think it's better to come forward and say, this opened by accident because people can get fired over seeing something, or seeming like they were searching the system for something that they shouldn't have seen, and things like that. Especially if one thing opens and then something else opens, it looks like you are looking for it.
Yeah, if you're like trying to figure out how much everyone else is making or what the bonuses were, or say, for example, you did have a conflict and there's certain things you're not supposed to be going into and you decide to go into them because you're curious. It's like, don't do that.
Or we had some summers look up other people's reviews.
That should not be accessible on the server anyway. That's like bad data design, but it happens.
Yeah, and the other thing in that scenario is do not go back and try to blame them and tell them they should have had security. Of course they should have had security, but you should not have been looking for it. Yeah, no one wants to hear that in the end. So I actually think in this situation, a lot of people might not do this, but I think get ahead of it and know that if you open something on the server, they may not be looking to see who opened it, but if they do, they're going to know that you opened it because you have a login.
Yeah, basically you can assume every keystroke you make is pretty much tracked at a firm.
Yep. So,
and you should assume that.
With everything, get ahead of it.
Yeah, and you should assume that your email is not private. You probably don't want to be using your firm email or your company email or employer's email for a lot of personal business, anyone who's ever done document discovery and done email discovery never uses email the same way again because you see all this crazy stuff that people put in their work email and you're like, why were they talking about this?
Yeah, and same with, I think, work instant messenger.
Yeah, anything that's work basically belongs to your employer. And you should regard it that way. And the other thing, sometimes people want to delete all of their email, like if they're leaving the firm or whatever. Like, A, don't do that because it just looks really weird and suspicious. And B, they have a copy anyway.
Yeah.
Like anything you're trying to delete, you're just drawing attention to yourself, basically. Like, why would they do this? Okay, what should we be looking for?
Well, and along those lines, they'll usually go through it with you when you're leaving in terms of what you need to do, to make sure everything's correct. But there's probably a policy about what you're supposed to do with your emails. And a lot of the work emails need to be filed and saved somewhere. And they'll usually tell you. But make sure you do that. Don't have a situation where something was supposed to be on the system and you don't work there anymore and they're calling you frantic. That doesn't look good either.
No, any documents, you need to wrap up everything so someone else can step in, make sure, double check every document that you need to have some places there, that all the stuff is filed, easy to access. These are basic work things that you don't want to leave a bad name once you're gone.
Yes, definitely.
All right, well, final question, because we are totally out of time. What if you have a plan, and you thought you were committed to it, and then it turns out you need to change that plan, whether it's changing offices, changing practice groups? How can people handle that?
Well, I would say similar to most of the advice we've given, tell them as soon as you know. So if there's, a change of heart about something, I wouldn't drag it out until the last minute and say, right before you started, I don't want to be in litigation. I want to be in corporate.
Okay.
It's going to be in a scenario where they say, okay, well, that's great, but you're still going to be in litigation.
Or they say, well, if you really want to do that, we can't accommodate that.
Yeah. I think if you tell them, let's say that you gave your practice group preferences when you left, and then you decide, even when you graduate or towards the end of the year, you've taken some different courses that, that's not the direction you want to go, tell them right away, talk to them, maybe try to network with people in that practice group. There's lots of different scenarios where, this would happen and things would change. Maybe they have an office in a different city and you've decided, or you have a personal reason you want to be there, tell them. You'd be surprised at how accommodating places can be when you let them know with enough notice and explain it. I feel like, like we've said, the situations arise when it's something that you've been hiding or haven't shared, or it seems like for whatever reason, you haven't been transparent about it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where you just have to be a grown up and you have to also accept the possible consequences of your decision making, so maybe it's, well, we can't get you in this office right now, but we could do it in 6 months or a year, and maybe you have to live apart from your partner who needs to be there for some reason. I mean, these are the trade-offs that people who are adults have to make sometimes.
Well, and I also think, with the practice group issue, there are times where, maybe you have to be in the practice group you didn't want because you did a job. Or maybe that's the most important thing to you and you're going to go somewhere else or you're going to look for another job. But I know, especially, when the economy was down, a lot of people didn't get the areas they wanted and they survived.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, do you want to have the job or not have the job? I mean, that's your choice. Either one of those is a valid decision, but you have to make that choice. You can't just demand that a firm accommodate you in a way that doesn't make any sense for them as a business. That's not reasonable. Right.
And they've also probably made plans based on, the needs of the office and the needs of the people. So, if your mind changed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can just make it work for you, but maybe they can.
Right. I feel like you should
be prepared.
Yeah, just ask for the thing that you actually want, but then be prepared to deal with whatever the reality happens to be. But if you don't ask for it, you're definitely not going to get it. So you may as well ask.
Definitely.
All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Typically, our new episodes are out on Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. And if you're looking for career guidance, check out our career subsite, careerdicta.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.